Hey guys, we're back. Today we have a topic that I think is both near and dear to Brian and my heart, right? Brian, you're a microbiologist.
Claim to be, yeah. No, I definitely am.
To be true. This term SME always unnerves me because I feel like as a practicing professional, I'm always learning and continuing
Right.
to learn. So I
Yep.
love the term microbiologist. I feel like it just levels me out, and I feel no matter where you are in the world, at any company in the world, microbiologists are there. So
Yep.
yeah, so I'm
Everything
excited
goes
to
through the
talk.
micro lab. You can't avoid it.
Well, good segue because we're talking about all things outsourcing microbiology and microbiological testing. So, Brian, I don't know if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Vanessa, in your view, what are some of the advantages of outsourcing quality control microbiology testing or the laboratory?
Yeah. So, well, I say let's talk about the reasons, I guess, when you would think
Sure.
micros outsource and the advantages with those. Because
Sounds
there's
good.
a lot of advantages. There are. Don't get me wrong. Of course, as a microbiologist, we always want testing and everything to occur in-house, right? But I think that there are very logical moments in the evolution of a company or a microbiology department in which it's appropriate to do it, and there are advantages to that. So I sort of liken it to the maturity of a group.
Hmm.
A lot of times when companies are just starting out, they don't know what they don't know in terms of needing that type of microbiological support, and arguably it depends on the type of company you are.
Yeah.
So microbiologists are most needed in sterile manufacturing, which is interesting, right? Because it's sort of like a yay or nay situation. But I would argue that microbiology is needed in most pharmaceutical manufacturing companies nowadays. Although I think that the folks standing up the company don't initially always know that. So I have seen in my career where microbiology departments are an afterthought. And you can see that by the size of the laboratory. It doesn't always accommodate the types of equipment that we need, right? We always need large refrigerators, large incubators, plenty of, biosafety cabinets or laminar flow hood, depending on the type of testing and product you have. But I think outsourcing is appropriate if you haven't considered microbiological testing when you stand up a company.
Yeah.
So initially, you can start to do method development, and you can have experts at an outsourcing lab support you in method development. And that's just to get the product up and running and going, right? There are moments when you have a brand new facility and you may want to outsource environmental monitoring during your EMPQ because maybe you don't have 20 folks in your EM department yet, and you're trying to hire them and bring that talent in-house. That's when you can lean on the expertise of an outsourcing, contract testing lab. So that's another example. But as a department maybe matures and evolves, and you bring a lot of that testing in-house, there could be even still longer term reasons to contract things out, and it can be appropriate. So microbial identifications is one of the biggest reasons you see contract testing labs supporting big pharma. Um, the equipment for performing microbial identifications, typically you need equipment that IDs bacteria, and then probably different equipment that IDs mold or fungi.
Hmm.
And they're expensive, and they take time to get the purchase order, to get it adopted in house, to get it actually moved in, to get it up and running. And while you're doing that, it may make sense to outsource, microbiological testing. So I see a lot of different ways we can lean on outsourcing this type of function, but it just depends on where you are in your organization and what your needs are, and if you've got budget constraints and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah, those are all great points. I think that there's an absolute cost and time consideration associated with both of them. You know, to your point, if you're an organization that's in development and or like on its maturity journey, let's say, you may
mhm.
actually do a cost benefit analysis to determine at what point, if we did choose to bring in a piece of equipment that can do genetic identification, how we build that set internally. versus sending it out for ID, which could be, well, you've got to streak it for isolation, then you have to ship it, then they have to be able to test it, and there's a turnaround time associated with it. You're not their only customer. So oftentimes I've seen almost every ID that gets sent out for identification is urgent.
Mm-hmm.
Urgent still could be 7 to 10 business days.
There's a little markup for that too.
Yeah, indeed, there always is a markup for that. And so,
Yeah.
an organization can say, okay, well, at what point do we just purchase the equipment and bring it in house and be able to cut off potentially, um, you know, a week's worth of time that we're waiting on a result potentially that could impact batch release. So I think those are all great points.
I like that. And I think that as microbiologists, it's one of my mantras in my career, that we need to strengthen our ability to do cost analysis,
Yeah.
to have these sort of business like conversations, because we need to in order to be able to bring in new technology, to bring in new equipment, to bring in new test methods. I remember a situation, over a decade ago, where I was trying to validate an endotoxin method, and I had to deal with beta glucans and
Hmm.
interference.
Yep.
And, we didn't have the ability, the troubleshooting, the reagents, the access to SMEs that we needed in order to troubleshoot that method. And I remember that was one of the first times that I had to like phone a friend and call an outsourcing contract lab that was specialized in this, right? And to help me work through that test method validation. And we did, and we had to, do a beta glucan blocker, I think at the
Yeah.
time. I'm
Yep.
like pulling it out of my vault of memories, of one of the first times I used the CTL. And it was really important. And that was a short duration. It was a short project, maybe like 3 to 6 months. And then we brought all of that testing back in house, and that's
Yep.
okay. So I think that there's a lot of different scenarios in which you could feasibly outsource microbiological testing. What do you think about disadvantages? Ugh, I
Mm.
feel like there are a lot of disadvantages,
Yeah.
even though I do think that there are appropriate times for it. What do you think is the first disadvantage that pops to your mind? Because I've got a whole list in my head.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's to me, it's the idea of ownership. You still own the
Mhm.
sample. And if you outsource, certain facets of testing, you might lose that knowledge, in house about how your facility is performing, the types of organisms. Really fundamentally, are we seeing a transition in the microbiology laboratory from the individuals that really were the site experts? They knew everything that was going on with respect to contamination control and micro in the lab. And sort of, do you lose that expertise and you just have individuals that are doing filtration and reading
Right,
results at that point?
right.
So to me, I think one of the disadvantages of outsourcing things is there's sort of, you lose ownership of it to some
And
extent.
some tribal knowledge,
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
absolutely.
That everyday comfort level of working with the product or the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in my history, some of the disadvantages was management of
Mm.
OOSs.
Yep.
Oof, I've just seen, unless you have it outlined in your quality agreement that your OOS procedure needs to be the one that takes precedence and
Mhm.
execute it. If you've negotiated that in your quality agreement, I love you and I love that for you. But that's not always the case, because a lot of times, without even knowing, the manufacturer or the firm sort of surrenders that nuance to
Yeah.
the contract testing lab. And then it becomes folded into the way that they do investigations. And, investigating microbiological results is not easy.
Right.
It's not a clean cut type of process. And it
Yeah.
sort of requires a bit of expertise, a bit of experience, and everything in between. And, you're invested in the outcome of that investigation so you can make improvements to your product, to your process, to your testing, whatever.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't think that the contract testing lab is as invested in that outcome as you. So I kind of feel like, when it comes to OOSs, you definitely have to have a partnership. You definitely have to have it in your agreement when you're notified of the OOS. And
Right.
then what are the immediate actions that need to take place? It's very rare that you can retest the sample, but if that's possible for your product type, you want to make sure that that's retained under the right
Right.
conditions. I mean, there's a lot of nuance here that happens immediately, and I don't always see contract testing labs managing it the best. But
Right. Yeah, your
I think
point
it's
is well taken with that, is that, primarily their responsibility may be to get you the result. And it's incumbent on you, if there is some sort of OOS or OL, particularly at, an outsourced manufacturing facility as well, that you go there.
yeah.
And I have seen it, in some outsourced microbiology laboratories where, they'll just pull up a Wikipedia quote about the organism and cut and paste that into their investigation.
Oh, that's
The
painful.
micro wiki may not be your friend all the time.
Right.
So it goes back to, that expertise in the laboratory, that I think you just can't underestimate those individuals. And oftentimes, the micro lab has the responsibility for performing the investigation. I've seen it where
I think you
there are
should.
micro individuals that don't know the manufacturing process, that
Yep.
don't know the environment, because they don't go into those environments.
Yeah.
Often
It's
they're just,
unacceptable.
pardon?
It's unacceptable.
I agree.
In
I mean, I'm a,
2023, microbiologists must go into manufacturing and you must
yeah,
understand your process. You can't just be the product has an OOS or that in-process sample is out of your process level. It has
yes.
to be that you take that result and you consider where the source of contamination is in your process or could have been in your environment and how that influences that OOS result. It
Yeah,
has to be.
you've got to go look at those spaces. You've got to look at the process. I always take the approach of walking the sample back to the source, right? Everything that went
I love
into it, you have to. It's critically important. And I've often seen it where there may be individuals that don't do that, and they make assumptions about what the issue is.
that. Yep.
Um, you know, and by the way, it may not just be the quality organization that's taking samples. If we're dealing with isolators, oftentimes it is the operations team that are taking those samples in those spaces. Well, then they need to be experts really when it comes to sampling and sample management and sample
Yep.
transfer.
Yep.
So you've got to look at everything, not just the environment necessarily as well.
Absolutely. And I think the theme of our series of video content here is oversight and partnership, right? So if you
Communication.
contract a micro test method out, that CTL is your partner, they're delivering a result, but all the upfront piece about sampling and delivering and shipping is your responsibility to investigate.
Yeah,
And then once the result is received, you still need to do the manufacturing investigation,
right.
right? There's just no getting around that. You can't contract that piece out even if you tried. So it's about a partnership and it's about getting all the information you need. And while that can be a disadvantage if your CTL doesn't do it right, it's an opportunity to do better next time and button up your quality agreement.
Yeah,
So
you are responsible for the quality of the sample, lowercase q. You know,
absolutely.
they test what they get.
I
Um,
think that's great. Yeah. And I think we can end on that, right?
yeah.
You are responsible for the quality. And I love that. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Brian. Until next time.
Speak with you soon. Bye, everyone.